In today's episode of Missed Opportunities, episode 2, we're going to be talking about Qi Adepts and how I feel like Qi Adepts in Fire Emblem Engage were a missed opportunity. So let's jump into it. Bonk! Alright, we got a bonk to start us off. Okay, so Qi Adepts. Qi Adepts, I think, are an interesting addition to the game. I like Chain Guard. I actually did end up enjoying using Diffuse Healer. There is a use case for it, so if the Qi Adept is damaged, you can kind of flip some healing, like get an AoE heal going. So there's some utility. They can use staves, they can punch dudes. The main thing I like them for is the Chain Guard. The Chain Guard allows you to take anything and turn it into a tank for a single combat. It's very useful, and it enables a lot of tactics that weren't present in other Fire Emblem games, because generally, if you want to tank, you need either some ability that lets you tank, some kind of gambit that lets you tank, or, just good stats and good speed and so on. But the ability to turn someone else into a tank is very interesting, but one thing I was disappointed with was the fact that there's only one unit type for Qi Adept, and that was Martial Monk / Martial Master, Martial Master being the advanced form of that. And nothing really changes about Chain Guard. So the way Chain Guard works is if you're at max HP, you can stick a unit in danger, and then you can Chain Guard that unit. And Chain Guarding that unit basically causes the Qi Adept to take 20% of max HP as damage, and the unit takes no damage from a single hit. Now, if an enemy unit hits twice, if multiple enemy units hit, you only get one Chain Guard. You can, however, use multiple Chain Guards, and each Chain Guard will trigger per attack. So if you have 2 Chain Guards, you can tank 2 attacks. And then both of your Martial Masters or Martial Monks will lose 20% of their max HP in order to Chain Guard. Essentially, it's like you're acting like a shield, and they dive in front of the enemy but take very little damage. They take a set amount of damage. So if an enemy were to hit an 100 on you, 100 damage or whatever, you would take nothing. You would take chip damage, essentially. So that's the main use of it. Now, how could they have expanded this? The first thing I think they could have done is made it so that Martial Master had a Chain Guard Plus. So what is Chain Guard Plus? So Chain Guard Plus would be the same thing as Chain Guard, but with the addition of working at 90% HP or higher. One of the things that is frustrating to deal with when chain guarding is when a unit levels up, which seems weird, but if a unit levels up, they can gain health, and if you gain health, you don't gain an extra point of health, you just gain higher max, so then you're not at max health anymore. So that's a little quality of life change that I would like to see. Also, that flexibility to be able to maybe get AoE healed from Sadal to 90% and then to Chain Guard again, I think would be nice. I think if Martial Master's key thing is chain guarding, I think it should be better at it than Martial Monk, and it's a little bit disappointing that it doesn't have an improved Chain Guard. I think that's a no-brainer. I think that would be a good addition to the game. It makes a lot of sense. Or even make it so that Chain Guard works at 1 to 2 range now instead of just 1 range. That would be also very cool. So you could Chain Guard at an off angle or something. So you could be just skirting the edge of danger positionally. I think that would be interesting. Okay, so there's that. Let's talk about Enchanter now. Enchanter is a great addition to the game. I think this is a step in the right direction, even though it does have some broken abilities. Enchanter adds a lot of utility, it turns every single item into a utility item. However, I think there should be 2 new classes, or they should have shipped with the base game. There should be an Enchanter, and there should be an Item Master, because Enchanter is basically an item master with some enchanting, but I think its item mechanics and convoy access could be better suited on a new class, and then Enchanter could be its own thing with its own mechanics that I will break down in a minute. All right, so, okay, I have some notes. I'm just going to skim these really quick. Just some notes. Okay, so I did already go over Qi Adept, Martial Monk. Yeah, so I talked about the upgraded thing. Okay, so we could have things like stances or buffs on Qi Adept. So what would be stances and buffs? So stance could be defensive stance or something, where the Qi Adept itself has a higher chance, or not a higher chance, it has more defense or gives more defense. So instead of it being a chain guard where you nullify a hit and then take some chip damage, it could be a thing where you enter defensive stance and all nearby allies take minus 5 or 6 or 7, some minus chip damage, something you could use no matter how much health you have. This would be interesting. Then obviously, and you could have a health threshold. So like, let's say that you'd have to be at like 80% health or higher to initiate defensive stance. And for every time you reduce damage, you take like 2 or 3% damage. So that way it's kind of like a weak chain guard. I think that would be interesting. You could also have other things like evasive stance, where the Qi Adept doesn't counterattack, but they increase their avoid for a turn. That would be really cool, actually, because then you basically become like an obstruct tile that's hard to hit type of thing. You wouldn't attack, so it would be purely defensive because they're martial masters. Like, it makes sense for them to have these stances or abilities. I think that would be very interesting. Or maybe the stances could be items, right? Like arts. So the arts, instead of just being things that punch and attack, there could be utility arts, like evasive art or dive art or whatever, or leaping art. That's a better name, where you like jump a tile to punch. Or, evasive arts, where you punch a dude and move back a tile, or you have increased avoid rate and you can't attack, for example. Like, there could be all these interesting arts, so I think that's a missed opportunity as well. But back to Enchanter. All right, what do I think Enchanter should be doing? I think it should be enchanting things. I think it should be doing two things. It should be a buff and debuff class that has situational access to like small amounts of AoE damage. So like, for example, you could buff, like, I don't think it should buff a sword. Like, I like the current system that it buffs like all the weapons. That's interesting. But what I would rather it do is like buff allies in general. So like, let's say I just buff this unit. Like, I buff Nell here, and now her weapons, and then I choose which buff I use. So the items the enchanter used could be consumable. They could be like scrolls, like scroll of damage increase. You come up with cooler names, like scroll of might or whatever. Allies gain +5 might with their weapons for 1 turn, and it could hit like 3 allies in a line or whatever shape they want to do. And each scroll could have a different shape it hits, and the enchanter scrolls could be reasonably priced, so they're not like so expensive, or they could be like, you can use them every couple of turns, so you can't just spam them. So let's say they last for like 2 to 3 turns, and then it goes on like a 2 to 3 turn cooldown or something. I think that would be really interesting. So you can situationally buff dudes, kind of like an AoE rally, and then you could also situationally debuff enemies. You could also have things like Burning Sword or Burning Fire, like Fire Enchantment or something, where when an ally hits an enemy, it does extra fire damage and then also sets their tile on fire, or just like sets the enemy on fire, so they take AoE damage, or I'm sorry, chip damage, like DOT damage. You could have enchantments that cause AoE attacks on hit. You could have enchantments that debuff. So the whole thing could just be about boosting allies' weapons to increase damage, to debuff enemies, to add new mechanics to the game that mix up the gameplay. I think that's what Enchanter should be. All right, now let's talk about Item Master, which I think this should fork off. So that way you have this thing that's all about buffing allies. So it's like a buff bot, like a utility. And then you also have this item utility that does like Enchanter's current thing of turning items into effects. I think that should be its own unit that has like convoy access, that can like throw items. I think it should be able to trade with things at range. It should be able to trade as many things as possible. So it's like a trade utility that can trade at like 1 to 3 range. So I could trade an item from a unit over here to a unit over here, and also use items. I think it should be able to use 2 items a turn, but then like nerf like Pure Water, for example. So you could have this like utility trade thing that could do like, it could be a staff access unit, so it could do like 2 obstructs a turn. It could have like 2 actions a turn, but it has no weapons. I think that would be very interesting. So you could do like 2 obstructs or 2 warps. You could also nerf it so it doesn't have access to emblems, like it can't use emblems, because obviously you could do like double Micaiah warp. But I think something like that, where it's just like a raw, pure utility unit that just like heals allies and buffs them, or in some cases just like resets things, like cleanses, just like a staff, like a dedicated staff utility bot, I think would be interesting. They also could all have Chain Guard as like the default. So every one of them still has Chain Guard, but then one of them goes like hardcore into Chain Guard, another one goes hardcore into items, another one goes hardcore into like buffing. And you could have like damage items or something if you want, that do like very low damage or something like that. So it has some kind of form of offense, or it has its own unique items. Like maybe it has like poison vials that do like extremely low, like 2 to 3 damage per hit, like it's armor ignoring damage. That just like chip, like very low chip damage, but then it puts like 1 stack of poison and it can't double. Like there would be ways to balance it that'd be easy, but I think having these 3 things be like the Qi Adepts would be very compelling, because you'd have like the Qi Adept that's all about buffs and debuffs. You'd have the Qi Adept that's all about raw utility, staff use, and items. You'd have the Qi Adept that's all about damage mitigation and to some degree punching things to death. Enchanter could have its own weapon too. I think if they all had their own weapon, it'd be super interesting, because you could have like different aspects of like the Qi Adept. You'd have like the magical aspect, the item aspect, and then the like physical martial artist aspect. And I think that would be very compelling. And obviously there's different ways to balance all these mechanics, but I think splitting them in these 3 ways would be super cool. It would add a lot to the game. I think if that was in the base game, I would be having a field day, just like running all these different team comps and doing all these different things. I think another thing the item one could do is maybe steal items as well. So it's kind of also like a thief. So it could steal like vulneraries and stuff, like not weapons from enemies, but it could steal, you know, like extra things on them. And enemies could have things placed on them, so stealing matters. So it's kind of like a thief in a way. And then thief, of course, you'd have steal as well. But if you have a thing that's all about items, it should be able to steal. So, but yeah, I think that's it for this one. I just wanted to talk about how Qi Adept could have more things. I do like that Enchanter's in the game. I don't like that it's behind the Xenologue. I feel like that kind of takes away from it, unfortunately. But we could have like 3 solid different things. I think Qi Adept in general is pretty good, and it's a step in the right direction. These are just suggestions to expand it. I doubt that intelligent systems will see this or even take this remotely seriously, but if they do, that would be cool. So yeah, that's it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoy these breakdowns. Oh yeah, I did forget, Dancer is technically a Qi Adept. Honestly, I feel like Dancer is a Qi Adept. They just kind of tacked Qi Adept on it. It's basically just, you know, can chain guard and punch things, and he has access to dancing, but you don't really punch with Sadal almost ever. His stats are so terrible, he can't really deal damage, so him being able to punch is kind of irrelevant. He just really equips shielding art. So in a way it's fine, like it makes sense. Like I actually don't even think of him as a Qi Adept. I feel like Dancer should be its own class. I feel like it's completely divorced from, it can still chain guard, but it doesn't feel like a martial, like Martial Master has staff access, can beat people to death with the right setup, and also has diffuse healer. Dancer just feels like its own class, so the fact that it is a Qi Adept, like I honestly forgot it was a Qi Adept, because it's like, oh yeah, this is a Dancer. Like it doesn't, I rarely chain guard with Sadal, because dancing is generally much better. There's a few situations where chain guarding makes sense, but dancing is generally the optimal way to play a Dancer. So making him also a Qi Adept, I'll give them credit. At least they're trying to make more Qi Adepts, but it's not like you can make anyone a Dancer, and him punching things is largely irrelevant to his kit. So he's kind of just made a Qi Adept because he doesn't fit into anything else. Like he's obviously on an Armor Knight, for example. He's not a healer, you know? So, and it's like a very physical class. You also could have something like Ninja or something, or even get rid of like the Thief archetype and just make Thief like Qi Adept, potentially. Well, maybe Ninja's more Qi Adept, and Thief is more Thief. It's its own thing, but Covert. I guess Covert kind of makes sense. Ninja could kind of be a Qi Adept or a Covert. And Armor Knight's another like situation where it's like, is it an armor? Is it a horse? Whatever, it's a horse. Like it's a cavalry. There's only one armored thing in the game. Just kind of weird. But yeah, that's it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this or found this interesting. Qi Adept, Dancer, like yeah, it is, but it doesn't really feel like it's one. It is a utility unit, I will give it that. So I guess like all the dedicated utility units are kind of just lumped into Qi Adept, which kind of makes sense. But yeah, we need more utility units. We need more interesting things like Dancer and Martial Master and Enchanter. All right, so definitely like and subscribe. Feel free to drop a comment. Peace.